I mean, I think Moscow has been the winner for the last few weeks, Tom, because of the increasing oil prices through this conflict. And as we saw, there was about a month period where the Trump administration authorized the purchase of Russian oil pretty much by the world. So I think Russia has certainly been a beneficiary of this conflict, also China. But I'm not sure there's anything new that Russia's gleaning here, because obviously the U.S. hasn't been involved in any sort of kinetic activities directly on the Russia front vis-a-vis the conflict in Ukraine.
Dan, we just heard from the Secretary of Defense as well as military leaders about the tremendous military success the U.S. Armed Forces is having in Iran, which has led in large part to this ceasefire. What are next steps, do you think? How do you think this really plays out?
So, I mean, again, I think it also depends on success is dictated by what was the objective. You know, we've heard a message about regime change, bringing back my political science education from GW. Regime change is really a change in government, which I'm not sure we've seen here. Where I think this is going is I think it's a reversion to a deal similar to what President Obama hammered out in 2015 under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. We heard talks from Vice President Vance's negotiations over the weekend where the talks were really hinging around Iran's nuclear enrichment capability, which, again, there was a deal that President Trump walked away from in 2018 that did keep Iran further away from a nuclear weapons program.
I look, Dan, at where we are, and I think the linchpin of so many conversations I have is China coming to the rescue of Iran. I believe the leadership in Beijing yesterday said that may not happen. What does Oliver Wyman know about the support Iran can receive from China?
I mean, China's been providing support, but really in so much as continuing to buy Iranian oil throughout this crisis. And there have been tankers that have transited the strait, albeit at a far smaller clip than what we'd seen in the 100-plus ships a day. That was Iranian oil bound for China. Now there's an interesting moment with this blockade of the blockade. Oil is not going to China at this point, but it takes time for this to flow through. We have not seen China act out much in support of Iran here, other than being a consumer. I don't expect to see much more support along those lines.
I've been dying to ask this because Dan Tannebaum's the only one who I know who read Patrick O'Brien, 21 volumes, Napoleonic War 3 times. Dan Tannebaum, is a blockade like a sanction? Is it just as simple as that?
Well, I mean, it's another use of hard power. I mean, we've obviously used blockades at different forms of American history. Is it another form of sanction? I mean, the sanctions are trying to use economic warfare to force a change in behavior. Obviously, the blockade is more direct interaction with the threat of seizure, of boarding, of potentially interdicting vessels that are moving in contravention of this blockade, which thus far we haven't seen. Is it another form of sanctions? It's another cudgel tool in the foreign policy arsenal to try and force Iran back to the negotiating table. The frustration in this is essentially, I think we're going to be back where we were 11 years ago and potentially in a worse position than we were then.
And we heard that from Admiral Bolton on Bloomberg this weekend, just 4 or 5 days ago as well. Paul Sweeney with Dan Tannebaum.
Hey, Dan, we kind of went into this war with Iran with effectively an open Strait of Hormuz, which obviously benefits countries all around the world. That is not the case today. Do you think we can get back to an open strait? Because it's not just the U.S. and Iran here. This is countries all around the world depend upon goods that flow through that strait.
And it's pretty clear that Iran didn't realize the full extent of what they could do. Obviously, when your back is against the wall, Iran has never attacked other Gulf states. They've never militarily blockaded the strait. I don't know if we go back to where we were unless there is a deal that both sides feel comfortable with. And if you'll remember, the negotiations were ongoing as the attacks began against Iran. And not to say that the Iranian regime should remain in place, because obviously it is a threat to safety and security around the world. But they have a lot more leverage now than they did a few months ago. And so if we revert back to this deal where they trade nuclear enrichment for sanctions relief, for the release of blocked assets, similar to what President Obama did a decade ago, they have more leverage going into it this side. I don't know how we account for that.
So I guess one of the questions then will become, to what extent do other countries come and become involved in this and maybe securing this strait? I mean, Secretary Hegseth was raised that point several times.
So I do think that will come over time. I've spent a substantial amount of time this week in D.C. with a number of European government officials, and the message is this. We agree with the objectives of what we believe the Trump administration is trying to do with Iran, but had they just consulted with us as this conflict began, this might have been a different situation, either for pushing diplomacy or a multilateral approach to dealing with the threat. I do believe there's kind of a waiting for some sort of a reach out in a more diplomatic manner to the allies to try and bring them on board. Because obviously, to your point, Paul, the world suffers from this. This is not an American issue, but it's certainly been an initiated conflict for the U.S. against Iran here.
I looked, Dan, at your study of this for 30, 40 years. And I'm going to ask a really serious question, because whether it's the treatment of the Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or the new guy in the press conference, Admiral Cooper of CENTCOM, with great respect, Dan Tannebaum, are we at war or are we at conflict?
So look, I am not a kinetic warfare expert. I think historically, and I worked in Congress when there was a vote on the Iraq War, which definitely declared war. Congress voted on it. I do think we are at war at this point. We've got a substantial amount of American soldiers, aviators, sailors in the Middle East to combat this crisis. Obviously, we're in a ceasefire at the moment where there is no active warfare happening, but they are on standby, as we heard in that press conference. So are we, I don't know the textbook definition of war, but if it kind of walks like a duck and quacks like a duck,